Okay, and finally, let's look at Stave 5, the theme of redemption, this concept of social responsibility, because we see in the end that Scrooge has adopted what Marley wishes he could have done. Mankind was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence were all my business. By the end of the novella, Scrooge very much embodies that idea. So let's firstly consider why Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol. So this supernatural allegorical tale was very much designed to impress upon the Victorian audience the need for them to be kinder, more charitable, and to take their social responsibility seriously. Dickens presents his ideology through the main protagonist, Scrooge, who is at the start unworthy of redemption, slowly shown in the error of his ways by a series of ghosts, and then finally in Stave 5, shows how he's clearly capable of redemption as he changes and becomes an altogether better man and person. Marley's ghost shows no indication that Scrooge deserves redemption. The ghost of the past shows that Scrooge can feel some mild remorse, perhaps indicating Scrooge may deserve redemption. The ghost of the present highlights how horrific Scrooge has treated Bob, and this causes Scrooge some consternation. And finally, the ghost of the future shows him the shadows that to come, and Scrooge appears ready and willing to learn the messages that he wants to show him, meaning that at this point Scrooge may be deserving of redemption. Finally, in Stave 5, his redemption is seen as worthy by the audience, as Scrooge is now a changed man. A Christmas Carol is very much a tale of redemption, and this is highlighted in the end of the novel by Scrooge showing that he's taken the messages imparted to him seriously. In his dialogue with Bob, Scrooge says, "I'll raise your salary," showing that he understands the power he has as an employer to help make the conditions that Bob works under more pleasant, fair, and to help him keep his family out of poverty. This relates to the poor work conditions inherent in society in Victorian Britain, as the pace of change was too quick due to the Industrial Revolution and wealthy factory owners exploiting the lower classes, was rife. Further to this, Scrooge shows he is worthy of redemption when he becomes a second father to Tiny Tim, showing he can be paternal and good as he has finally come to realise the joy in having children around. He also shows a humble side to him as he let them laugh at the alteration in him, which implies he knows they are laughing at him and why, but being happy and joyful is more important than allowing others to be derogatory towards him. As well as this, Dickens shows the redemption is worthy of Scrooge, as he knew how to keep Christmas well, which in modern times may mean lots of presents and food, but for contemporary audience at the time, that would have meant to be kind, charitable, and spend time with family. Scrooge, therefore, by the end of the novella, shows that he's keeping to his repeated words from earlier in Stave 5 and the end of Stave 4, that he would live in the past, the present, and the future, showing that he understood the messages that the ghosts had delivered to him and he was able to have a second chance, and that the second chance was not going to be wasted on him or by him. Therefore, Dickens shows through his presentation of Scrooge that he does deserve redemption by the end of the novel, although, in order to deserve it, there were many lessons that he had to learn along the way. So Dickens introduces this first inkling that social responsibility and being kind to others is an important message in the novella in Stave 1, when Scrooge sits in his counting house in the cold and the two portly gentlemen come in. Scrooge is downright rude, and his accusatory question of them shows that he believes poverty is the fault of the person who is poor, a widely held belief at the time. The rhetorical questions that Scrooge asks of them, are there no workhouses, are there no prisons, shows that Dickens understands the power of the poor law at the time and uses Scrooge to highlight the way social responsibility was being passed on to others by the individuals within society. Scrooge, as a self-made man who was once poor but happy, may have understood what it was like to have no money, but he has evidently forgotten this. Okay, so one of the most important elements of responding to this text is the AO3 objective, making sure that you reference the social and historical context. So this is particularly important here. So workhouses were horrendous places akin to being a prison, where the unfortunate people or children who ended up in them were the most unfortunate and destitute in society. The people who went to workhouses for help and support were stuck in an endless rut of being unable to earn their own way in the world, and they often had no fixed address, and once in the workhouse system they were often stuck. They were feared by ordinary people, as only the most desperate and wretched people would go there for help. Yes, the workhouses provided bed and meagre rations of food, but in exchange for this, families were divided, the poor were given a uniform as opposed to being able to wear their own clothes, and they were expected to work for their keep. This system was designed by the Amendment to the Poor Law in 1835, which had sought to make the conditions better for the poor, and it did not actually achieve this, and thus in Victorian era, the workhouses became synonymous with hard labour and cruelty. Dickens knew this, and he campaigned against this, and perhaps the repetition in Stave 3 of A Christmas Carol by the ghost of Christmas Present of Scrooge's callous disregard for the poor is a reminder that all mankind of the time had a social responsibility to object to the cruelty of the workhouses and indeed the prisons. Dickens's father going to a debtor prison had a long-lasting enduring effect, which may have meant that the pairing of the two places was a deliberate choice by the writer to represent the synonymous nature of the two places. Today we understand prison is designed as a place of incarceration for wrongdoing, but for many prisons in the Victorian times, being unable to pay for your debts was reason enough to be sent to jail, which was an indignity that would have been unsufferable. However, if the wealthy businessmen such as Scrooge stood up and took their social responsibility seriously, then this indignity could have been stopped. Scrooge not only rejects his social responsibility towards unknown poor people, he rejects his social responsibility towards his family too. His nephew Fred is rejected by Scrooge, and he shows that he has no desire to be kind towards him either. Fred arrives full of Christmas wishes, and Scrooge greets him in his characteristic cold-hearted and unkind manner, repeating questions without giving Fred any chance to respond. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough, showing Scrooge that money should be a key factor in making people happy. Dickens is implying that Scrooge had lost sight of the core benefits of having family. Fred mirrors his questions with, what right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough, which, while comical, is a quick rejoinder to Scrooge and should give him pause for thought. Scrooge's social responsibility to look after his own family has clearly been put to one side, but Fred maintains his own cheerful demeanour and furthermore in his dialogue gives Scrooge a speech about the goodness inherent in Christmas. Fred's message seems to be beseeching Scrooge to take a long, hard look at himself and recognise that everyone is human and the same, and that we all deserve to be treated equally. This shows that Fred completely understands his social responsibility, whereas Scrooge had completely lost sight of it. Furthermore, Scrooge is shown to regret in slight manner his rejection of Fred when the ghost of Christmas past helps him revisit his sister Fan in Stave 2. Showing this regret implies that somewhere in Scrooge's psyche there is an element of understanding about the importance of family, particularly at Christmas time, and the duty to each other. Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind and answered briefly, yes. The monosyllabic response here, which contrasts with his earlier caustic, rude and more elaborate responses, implies that Scrooge is perhaps reflecting on his behaviour towards his nephew and recognising that his sister Fan would have been hurt by his behaviour. Here Dickens is showing how familial social responsibility is also important, as well as reminding us that Christmas is a time for spending time with those that you love, and that we have a social responsibility to uphold the time of year as sacred and special in keeping with Christian beliefs. The Cratchits are very much key to this kind of importance of family and social responsibility. Bob Cratchit and his family clearly represent the sacred nature of Christmas throughout the novella, but again Dickens highlights a major failing in the Victorian era of employers in relation to employees in several important ways. In Stave 1 we see the terrible conditions that Bob endures in the counting house, his dismal cell with one coal, and he's trying to warm himself at the candle, wearing his comforter, showing that in midwinter Bob's working environment is cold, cramped and miserable, which is a purposeful decision to save money by Scrooge. This highlights how money was deemed much more important by employers than health, happiness or prosperity of their employees. During the Industrial Revolution, there was unprecedented opportunity for men to make from the upper and middle classes to make money, but this was to the detriment of the poor, who were forced to work long hours for little pay and often in dangerous conditions. We see later the Cratchit family and the suffering that the whole family endure at the hand of Scrooge's poor employment. In Stave 3, such a goose is exaggerated way the whole family discuss a small goose that feed them all, but the description by Dickens of sufficient dinner belies the fact that it was paltry amounts of food for the whole family to enjoy. Mrs. Cratchit and the girls are braves in ribbons, and this could symbolise the whole family's demeanour and the way that they are all able to endure the abject poverty that they live in on a daily basis. Poverty, like that of the Cratchit family, was commonplace for the working classes, and this also led to them being unable to properly care for their own children through lack of money as opposed to not desiring to care for them. Tiny Tim exemplifies this as he's crippled, a crutch without an owner, and the ghost of the present repeats Scrooge's words back to him, showing how inhumane he is. If he be like to die, he better do it and decrease the surplus population. Again, this example shows that Scrooge has failed in his social responsibility, as he could pay Bob more money, and this would potentially allow the Cratchit family to pay to see a doctor. As their circumstances stand, Tim is stoic and endures his suffering well and charitably. On Christmas Day, Tim said he hoped that people saw him in church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see, which reinforces through the eyes of the innocent that we all have a social responsibility to remember those less fortunate than ourselves. In this era, the welfare state was not in existence, and this meant that families like the Cratchits were offered no assistance from the state. Their only option would have been to fall back on the workhouses, which, as recognised earlier, would have been a shameful, degrading and embarrassing experience. Dickens, as a campaigner for social justice and an advocate for the rights of man, would perhaps have welcomed the reforms that were brought about as a result of the Beveridge Report. The welfare state would arguably have been a reform that Dickens embraced, as it brought about the support and a safety net for families in times of dire need, such as his own had suffered when his dad was sent to a debtor's prison, and Dickens himself, as an 11-year-old, was sent to work in a blackening factory. Throughout the novella, it is evident in the portrayal of Scrooge and the other minor characters that the supernatural are used to highlight the social injustice faced by many in London. In Stave 4, we are shown the uncaring way the businessmen behave about the death of Scrooge, although the dramatic irony here means that Scrooge is unaware. This dramatic irony highlights that Scrooge is prepared to change his ways. Mrs. Dilber, the laundress, the undertaker's maid, man, and Old Joe reinforce the suffering of the poor and the lows that they have to stoop in order to survive. All of the first three characters steal from the dead, and all of the first three characters steal from the dead Scrooge and then pawn the measly stolen goods to Old Joe, who gives them very little for their troubles. Dickens here appears to show Scrooge throughout the Stave that he has a social responsibility to be good, kind, charitable and benevolent in life, or in death there'll be no one to remember you or grieve you. Essentially, Dickens' message seems to be that in death is a great equaliser, and once dead, it doesn't matter how much money you had in life, you can't take it with you, and it won't benefit you once you are dead. Marley, who was dead to begin with, set Scrooge out on a journey of rediscovery, and while his own journey appears to be futile, it seems that he is the first warning to Scrooge that he needs to change and to become more socially aware. The ghost of the past shows Scrooge what it is like to live in a warm-hearted, kind and caring way, and that it is not or has not been beyond him previously. When the ghost of the present arrives, we see this utter misery but juxtaposing joy that the Cratchit family suffer from a result of their poverty, which reinforces the message Dickens wanted to give to the upper middle classes about being humane to their employees. Finally, when the ghost of Christmas yet to come arrives, we see that social responsibility is everyone's business, which links beautifully to Marley's initial recognition that mankind was my business. Scrooge at the end is deserving of redemption, and if someone with such little regard for humanity and low scruples can change, then perhaps Dickens is telling the audience, you too can change, by reinforcing the miserly presentation of Scrooge and almost making him a caricature at the start and then following him on a journey of redemption. We see that our actions today matter, and living a good moral life with consideration to the impact we have on others is hugely important. In this way, Dickens summarises his allegorical message with Tim, who lived, saying, God bless us, everyone, collectively acknowledging once again that money is not what matters in life. Dickens throughout the novella uses Scrooge's reprehensible behaviour to highlight the evil, the ills, the poverty, the social class differences, the avarice and the mean-spirited nature of some members of the human race, while reminding us through Stave 5 that redemption is possible. Mankind needs to be more socially responsible, and that message is reinforced in modern times through the climate change movement championed by Greta Thunberg, the upsurge of food banks in the country that shows the welfare state is not coping with the demands of modern society, and the rising number of homeless people who have nowhere to go. Therefore, it appears that Dickens believes that we are all capable of being a little kinder and a little more socially aware, and that message stands the test of time as we are still able to relate the message in A Christmas Carol to the social ills in society in the 21st century, and recognise the parallels in the allegorical tale. So what I'd like you to do here is have a look at this extract. Okay, pause the video now. As we do in class, pick out your 4 key quotes that you would talk about and link them to the question, and then create your essay plan. How would you answer if you got this in the exam?